The year was 1971, and John Wayne, the most powerful man in Hollywood, the living symbol of American patriotism, walked onto the set of a late-night talk show with one mission: to destroy Muhammad Ali's reputation on national television. He had rehearsed his words for weeks. He had prepared his attack with military precision. He was going to expose Ali as a coward, a traitor, and a disgrace to everything America stood for. What John Wayne didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, he would be standing in the hallway of that television studio with tears streaming down his face, begging Muhammad Ali for forgiveness. And 40 million Americans watching at home would witness something that would change how they thought about courage, patriotism, and what it truly means to be a hero. This isn't just another celebrity confrontation story. This is about the moment when hatred met grace, when prejudice faced truth, and when the most unlikely conversation in television history revealed that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from destroying your enemy, but from saving their soul. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you believe that true strength comes not from tearing others down, but from lifting them up, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that prove dignity can conquer hatred every single time. It was a cold February evening in Los Angeles when the producers of the Merv Griffin Show made a decision that would create television history. They had booked Muhammad Ali for what was supposed to be a routine interview about his upcoming legal battles and potential return to boxing. But someone in the production meeting had an idea that seemed brilliant at the time, an idea that would generate massive ratings and national conversation. What if they surprised Ali with an unexpected guest? What if they brought out John Wayne? The logic seemed bulletproof. John Wayne represented everything traditional about America: patriotism, military service, conservative values, and unwavering support for the Vietnam War. Muhammad Ali represented everything controversial: a black Muslim who had refused to serve in Vietnam, been stripped of his heavyweight title, and faced years in prison for his beliefs. The producers saw ratings gold in the confrontation drama conflict and two American icons on opposite sides of the most divisive issue in the nation. What they didn't anticipate was that they were about to witness not a destruction, but a transformation that would be talked about for decades. John Wayne arrived at the CB's Television City studio 2 hours early on that February evening. At 63 years old, he was still the biggest movie star in the world, still the man who had defined American masculinity for 3 decades. He wore his signature Western boots, a perfectly tailored suit jacket, and carried himself with the authority of someone who had never been wrong about anything in his life. "Where's the draft dodger?" Wayne asked the young production assistant who greeted him at the studio entrance. His voice carried that famous drawl, but there was an edge to it that made people uncomfortable, a coldness that suggested this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Mr. Ali is in the green room, sir," the assistant replied nervously. "But Mr. Wayne, I should tell you." "I don't need to be told anything about that man," Wayne interrupted sharply. "I know exactly who he is and what he represents. And tonight, America's going to see the truth about Muhammad Ali." The production assistant, a young woman named Sarah, wanted to warn Wayne that Ali wasn't what he expected. She had spent time with Ali that afternoon and had been surprised by his gentleness, his thoughtfulness, the way he had talked to the janitorial staff about their families, asking about their children's names and remembering details from previous conversations. She wanted to tell Wayne that the man in the green room was reading a philosophy book, not planning any kind of confrontation. But John Wayne wasn't interested in warnings or different perspectives. He had made up his mind about Muhammad Ali years ago, based on newspaper headlines, political rhetoric, and his own unshakable belief that real Americans serve their country without question. Nothing was going to change his opinion. Meanwhile, Muhammad Ali sat in the green room wearing a simple dark suit, appearing calm and centered. At 29 years old, he was in the prime of his life, though the boxing ban had kept him out of the ring during what should have been his greatest years. The financial pressure was enormous. Legal bills, family expenses, and no income from boxing had left him struggling despite his fame. Ali was reading a worn copy of The Autobiography of Malcolm X when Sarah knocked softly on the door and entered the room. Her expression was troubled, almost guilty. "Mr. Ali," she said hesitantly, "I need to tell you something." Ali looked up and smiled warmly, That famous, genuine smile that had charmed millions but also infuriated those who saw it as arrogant. "What's on your mind, young lady? John Wayne is here. He's going to be on the show with you tonight." She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "The producers didn't tell you because they wanted it to be a surprise." Ali's expression didn't change. He closed his book slowly, marking his place with a finger, and set it aside on the small table next to his chair. "John Wayne," he repeated quietly, as if testing the name. "The cowboy movie star." "Yes, sir." "Ali." Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I've heard him talking backstage. He's not just planning to debate you. He wants to call me a coward." Ali finished for her gently. "He wants to tell America that I'm a traitor for not going to Vietnam. He wants to destroy me on national television." Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ali. I just thought you should know. It's not fair what they're doing to you. They're setting you up." Ali stood up from his chair and walked over to where Sarah stood. He was tall, 6'3", but he moved with surprising grace, like a dancer rather than a fighter. He took her hands gently in his, and his voice was soft but steady. "What's your name, young lady?" "Sarah, sir." "Sarah, let me tell you something." Ali's eyes were kind but serious. "I've been called a coward by people much more powerful than John Wayne. I've had the President of the United States call me unpatriotic. I've had the FB following me. I've had the United States government try to put me in prison for 5 years. I've lost my title, my livelihood, and the best years of my career." He paused, still holding her hands. "But you know what I've never lost." Sarah shook her head, unable to speak. "My dignity. Because dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you give yourself by staying true to who you are, no matter what anyone else says or does." He released her hands and smiled that famous smile again. "Now you go back to your job and don't worry about me. I've faced tougher opponents than a man who shoots blanks in movies." Sarah laughed despite herself wiping her eyes. "You're not scared at all, are you, Mr. Ali?" "Scared," Ali said, that familiar twinkle appearing in his eyes. "I'm Muhammad Ali. I shook up the world. What's one cowboy compared to that?" But as Sarah left the room and closed the door behind her, something changed in Ali's expression. The confident smile faded, and for a moment, he looked older than his 29 years. He walked to the small window that looked out over the Los Angeles skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. The truth was that he was tired, deep tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. He was tired of defending himself, tired of explaining his choices to people who had already decided he was wrong, tired of being the most hated man in America for standing up for his beliefs. Every interview was a battle, every public appearance a trial, every day a reminder that his own country saw him as an enemy. But tonight, he would face John Wayne, the living embodiment of the America that rejected him, and he would show that same America what real courage looked like. The studio lights were blindingly bright as Muhammad Ali walked onto the set of the Merv Griffin Show at exactly 11:30 p.m. Pacific Time. The studio audience of about 200 people applauded politely, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Everyone knew something significant was about to happen, though nobody, including Merv Griffin himself, knew exactly what. Griffin, the veteran talk show host who had interviewed everyone from Frank Sinatra to Richard Nixon, looked genuinely uncomfortable as he prepared to make the introductions. He had been informed about the planned surprise guest only an hour before taping, and his instincts told him this could go very wrong very quickly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Griffin announced to his television audience, "please welcome the former heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali." Ali took his seat on the famous talk show couch, his movements graceful and controlled despite the tension he felt inside. He smiled at the studio audience, waved briefly, but his eyes were scanning the room, waiting for what he knew was coming. "Muhammad, it's great to have you here tonight," Griffin said, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. "Now, before we get into your boxing career and your ongoing legal battles, I have a surprise for you tonight." Griffin paused, and the studio fell silent except for the hum of the television cameras. "Please welcome our next guest, Academy Award winner, American legend, and one of the biggest stars in Hollywood history, Mr. John Wayne." The studio audience erupted in thunderous applause as John Wayne strode onto the stage. His presence was overwhelming, the physical embodiment of American power, confidence, and authority. He was a big man, 6'4", and broad-shouldered, and he moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. But what was most striking was that he didn't acknowledge Ali at all. He walked past the couch where Ali sat, took his position at the opposite end without so much as a glance, and waited for the applause to die down with the patience of a man who was accustomed to being the center of attention. The studio audience sensed the tension immediately. This wasn't the usual friendly banter between celebrities. There was something cold and hostile in the air, something that made even the camera operators shift nervously behind their equipment. "Well," Griffin said, trying to inject some lightness into the moment, "this is quite a pairing we have here tonight. Two American icons, representatives of different eras and different perspectives on. Let's not pretend we're equals." Wayne interrupted, his voice cutting through Griffin's words like a blade. His famous drawl was present, but underneath it was a hardness that made the studio audience gasp audibly. "I'm an American icon," Wayne continued, his eyes fixed straight ahead, still not looking at Ali. "That man over there is something else entirely." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Even by the loose standards of 1971 television, this level of public disrespect was shocking. Several audience members audibly gasped. Griffin's face went pale. The camera operators exchanged nervous glances, uncertain whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. But Muhammad Ali remained perfectly still. He sat with his hands folded calmly in his lap, his expression unreadable, looking at Wayne with what seemed to be genuine curiosity rather than anger or hurt. "Mr. Wayne," Griffin said carefully, trying to regain control of his show, "perhaps we could discuss." "No, Merv, let's get right to it." Wayne finally turned to face Ali directly for the first time. "I've wanted to say this to your face for years." What happened next would be replayed on television for decades, studied in journalism schools, and remembered as one of the most shocking moments in broadcast history. "You're a disgrace," Wayne said, his voice rising with each word. "You're a coward. While real American men were dying in the jungles of Vietnam, fighting for freedom, you were hiding behind your religion, refusing to serve your country." The studio was completely silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to have stopped. Camera operators held their breath. The studio audience sat frozen, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Ali still hadn't moved. He sat like a statue, his expression unchanged, his hands still folded. It was as if Wayne's words were simply bouncing off him, having no effect whatsoever. "You call yourself the greatest," Wayne continued, his voice now carrying across the entire studio. "But there's nothing great about a man who won't fight for his country. Nothing great about someone who turns his back on the men who are dying to protect his freedom to run his mouth." Wayne stood up from his chair, towering over Ali, who remained seated. The physical intimidation was obvious and deliberate. "You want to know what I think about you, Muhammad Ali? I think you're a coward who hid behind lawyers and publicity while better men than you died for America. I think when you're cornered, when you can't run to your handlers and your press conferences, you're just another scared little man who talks too much." The attack was brutal, personal, and designed to destroy. Wayne had prepared these words, rehearsed them, crafted them for maximum impact. He was using his platform, his fame, his reputation to utterly demolish Muhammad Ali on national television. Griffin sat paralyzed in his chair, uncertain whether to intervene or let this unprecedented moment play out. The producers in the control room were frantically debating whether to cut to commercial, but they were also aware they might be witnessing television history. Wayne gestured around the studio set, his voice dripping with contempt. "Look around you, Ali. No ropes to lean against. No referee to protect you. Just you and the consequences of your mouth. Just you and the truth about what kind of man you really are." The threat was unmistakable. This wasn't just verbal assault. It was public execution. Wayne was trying to destroy not just Ali's reputation, but his very identity, his sense of self, his standing with the American people. But then something extraordinary happened. Muhammad Ali slowly unfolded his hands and placed them on the arms of his chair. He looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, at Griffin, and then directly at John Wayne. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. There was no anger, no defensiveness, no hurt, just quiet certainty. "Mr. Wayne," Ali began, "you just called me a coward. So let me ask you something." Wayne's eyes narrowed, surprised that Ali was responding at all rather than wilting under the assault. "Have you ever been to Vietnam?" The question hung in the air. Wayne's expression shifted slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time. "I've supported our troops every way I can," Wayne replied, but there was less conviction in his voice. "I've done everything." "That's not what I asked," Ali interrupted softly, but with unmistakable authority. "I asked if you've ever been to Vietnam. Have you ever held a rifle in a jungle? Have you ever watched a friend die in front of you? Have you ever been shot at by someone who was trying to kill you?" The studio audience was leaning forward now, sensing that something fundamental was shifting in the dynamic between these two men. Wayne's jaw tightened. "I served my country in other ways. I made films that supported." "You made movies," Ali said simply. "You played soldiers. You pretended to be brave while other men were actually being brave. And now you sit here and call me a coward because I refused to pretend." A murmur went through the studio audience. This was not what anyone had expected. Ali wasn't defending himself. He was dismantling Wayne's entire position with surgical precision. "Let me tell you something about courage, Mr. Wayne." Ali's voice grew stronger, that famous poetic rhythm beginning to emerge. "Courage isn't doing what's easy. Courage isn't doing what everyone expects you to do. Courage is standing up for what you believe in, even when the whole world is against you." Ali stood up slowly, his full height commanding the stage. The cameras followed him as he moved to the center of the set, his presence suddenly filling the entire studio. "When I refused to go to Vietnam, do you know what they offered me?" Ali's voice carried to every corner of the studio. "They said if I just went over there, I wouldn't have to fight. I'd just do exhibitions, entertain the troops, shake some hands. I could keep my title, keep my money, keep my freedom. All I had to do was put on a uniform and pretend to support a war I believed was wrong." He turned to look directly at Wayne, his gaze steady and unwavering. "That's what you would have done, isn't it, Mr. Wayne? Put on a costume and pretend. That's what you've been doing your whole career." Wayne's face was red with anger, but underneath the anger, something else was beginning to show. Doubt, uncertainty, the first cracks in a lifetime of absolute certainty. "Now you listen here," Wayne started to say, rising from his chair. "No," Ali said firmly, his voice carrying an authority that filled the entire studio. "You've had your say. Now you're going to listen to mine." The power in Ali's voice was so absolute that even John Wayne, the man who had dominated every room he'd ever entered, fell silent. "I didn't refuse to go to Vietnam because I was afraid to die," Ali continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I refused because I was afraid to kill. I refused because my religion teaches me that all human life is sacred. I refused because those Vietnamese people never called me the N-word. They never lynched my people. They never denied me my rights as a human being." Ali's voice cracked slightly with emotion, but he continued without pause. "But you want to know what I am, Mr. Wayne? I'm a man who gave up everything, for what I believed in. I'm a man who faced 5 years in federal prison rather than betray his conscience. I'm a man who stood alone against the most powerful government in the world and said, 'No, this is wrong, and I won't be part of it.'" He walked closer to Wayne, stopping just a few feet away. Despite the difference in their ages and backgrounds, Ali suddenly looked like exactly what he was. A champion who had never been defeated by anything that truly mattered. "You call that cowardice? Then you don't know what courage means." The studio was absolutely silent. Griffin sat frozen in his chair, afraid to move or speak. The audience seemed to have stopped breathing. Camera operators found themselves wiping tears from their eyes without understanding why. John Wayne stared at Muhammad Ali, and for the first time in the conversation, something fundamental was changing in his expression. The anger was still there, but beneath it, something that looked like confusion, like doubt, like the beginning of recognition that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about something important. "You think you're the only one who ever sacrificed anything," Wayne said, but his voice had lost its edge, its certainty. "You think you're the only one who ever stood up for what you believed in." "No," Ali said quietly, his voice gentle now rather than commanding. "I think we all have to make choices about who we want to be. And I think those choices define us more than anything else we do." Ali sat back down, but this time he sat closer to Wayne, his posture open rather than defensive. "Mr. Wayne, I've watched your movies my whole life. I know you believe in honor, in courage, in doing what's right. Those are the values you've spent your whole career celebrating." Wayne nodded slowly, uncertain where this was going but unable to interrupt. "So tell me," Ali continued, his voice soft but penetrating. In all those movies, when the hero stands up against injustice, when he refuses to back down even when everyone is against him, when he sacrifices everything for his principles. Isn't that exactly what I did? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Wayne opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in his adult life, John Wayne was speechless. The only difference, Ali said softly, is that I wasn't playing a role. I was living it, and the injustice I was standing against wasn't in some screenplay. It was real. It's still real. For the first time since the conversation began, Wayne looked away. His hands, which had been clenched into fists throughout his attack on Ali, slowly relaxed. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if a weight he had been carrying for years was suddenly becoming too heavy to bear. I came here tonight to destroy you, Wayne said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I know, Ali replied simply. I was so sure I was right, so sure you were everything wrong with this country. Ali waited, giving Wayne space to continue. And now, Wayne's voice trailed off. He looked up at Ali, and there was something in his eyes that the cameras caught and would replay for decades to come. Now I'm not sure of anything anymore. The studio audience didn't know how to react. This wasn't the confrontation they had expected. This was something else entirely. Something raw and human and transformational that was happening in real time in front of 40 million viewers. Mr. Wayne, Ali said gently, can I tell you a story? Wayne nodded, not trusting his voice. When I was a boy in Louisville, my father took me to see one of your movies. I think it was Stagecoach. And I remember thinking, that man is so brave. That man stands up for what's right, no matter what. You were my hero. Wayne looked up sharply, surprised and moved by this unexpected revelation. And then I grew up, Ali continued, and I learned that the world is more complicated than the movies. I learned that sometimes the people calling you a hero are wrong, and the people calling you a villain are wrong too. I learned that the only person who can judge your courage is you. Ali leaned forward slightly. I don't hate you, Mr. Wayne. I don't even blame you for what you said tonight. You believed what you believed, just like I believe what I believe. The difference is I had to pay for my beliefs. I had to sacrifice for them. And that's something you can't understand until you've done it yourself. What happened next wasn't captured by the television cameras, though it was witnessed by everyone in the studio. The producers, sensing that the confrontation had taken an unexpected and potentially damaging turn, called for a commercial break. The studio lights dimmed, and the audience began murmuring among themselves, trying to process what they had just witnessed. John Wayne stood up abruptly and walked off the stage without a word, leaving Ali sitting alone on the couch. Griffin approached Ali nervously, sweat visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Muhammad, I am so sorry, Griffin said. We never should have ambushed you like that. We had no idea he would. It's all right, Merv, Ali said calmly, straightening his tie. Sometimes people need to say things out loud before they can hear how wrong they sound. What do you think he's going to do? Griffin asked, glancing toward the wings where Wayne had disappeared. Ali smiled slightly, not triumphantly, but with something that looked like compassion. I think he's going to think. Maybe for the first time in a long time. In the hallway outside Studio 4, John Wayne stood alone under the harsh fluorescent lights. His hands were shaking, not from anger anymore, but from something else, something he hadn't felt in years. The encounter with Ali had stripped away decades of certainty, leaving him face to face with questions he had never wanted to ask. Sarah, the young production assistant who had warned Ali about Wayne's intentions, walked past him on her way to the control room. She stopped when she saw his face, shocked by what she saw there. Mr. Wayne, are you all right? Wayne looked at her, and she was amazed to see that his eyes were wet, his face vulnerable in a way that seemed impossible for the man who had embodied American strength for 3 decades. That man in there, Wayne said slowly, his voice thick with emotion. I've spent years hating him, years thinking he was everything wrong with this country, and in 10 minutes he just... Wayne couldn't finish the sentence. He made you see what? Sarah asked gently. That maybe I was wrong, Wayne whispered, the words seeming to cost him enormous effort. About him, about a lot of things. Sarah didn't know what to say. This was John Wayne, the symbol of American certainty and strength, standing in a television studio hallway, questioning everything he believed. Mr. Wayne, Sarah said carefully, it's not too late. The show isn't over. You could go back out there. Wayne shook his head. And say what? That I was wrong, that everything I've said for years about that man was wrong. Would that be so bad? Wayne looked at her for a long moment, and slowly, something changed in his expression, a dawning realization that admitting error might not be weakness, but strength. No, he said quietly. No, I suppose it wouldn't be. When the Merv Griffin Show returned from commercial break, Griffin was prepared to wrap up the interview with Ali alone. The assumption throughout the studio was that John Wayne had left the building, that the confrontation was over, that the damage, whatever it was, had been done. But as Griffin began to speak, movement from the side of the stage caught everyone's attention. John Wayne was walking back onto the set, slowly, deliberately, like a man walking to his own execution or his own redemption. The studio audience fell completely silent. Ali turned to watch, his expression calm but alert. Wayne walked across the stage until he was standing directly in front of Muhammad Ali, towering over him as Ali remained seated. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the two men just looked at each other. The conservative icon and the controversial champion, the symbol of old America and the voice of new America, the attacker and his target. Then John Wayne did something that no one in that studio, including Muhammad Ali himself, expected. He extended his hand. "Mr. Ali," Wayne said, his voice thick with emotion that was impossible to mistake. "I owe you an apology." The studio audience gasped as if they had witnessed a miracle. This was John Wayne, the man who never apologized for anything, the symbol of American strength and certainty, the actor who had spent his career playing characters who were always right, publicly admitting he was wrong. Ali stood up slowly and took Wayne's hand. The gesture was simple, but everyone in the studio understood they were witnessing something historic. "I came here tonight to tear you down," Wayne continued, his grip on Ali's hand firm and steady despite his emotional state. "I came here convinced that you were a coward and a traitor. But you're not." Wayne paused, searching for words that could adequately express what had just happened to his understanding of the world. "You're braver than I've ever been, Mr. Wayne," Ali began. "No, let me finish," Wayne interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "I've spent my whole career playing heroes, men who stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. But it was all pretend. When the cameras stopped rolling, I went home to my comfortable life, my money, my fame." Wayne looked directly into Ali's eyes, and there was no pretense left, no performance. Just raw honesty. "You didn't have that luxury. You stood up for what you believed in, and you paid for it with everything you had. That's not cowardice. That's the kind of courage I've only ever pretended to have." The studio was completely silent except for the quiet sound of people crying. Tough cameramen, cynical producers, even some of the studio audience who had come expecting entertainment and found themselves witnessing something that felt sacred. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Wayne continued. "The things I've said about you, in public and in private, were unforgivable. But I want you to know that from this moment on, I will never speak against you again. And if anyone asks me about Muhammad Ali, I will tell them the truth." "What truth is that, Mr. Wayne?" Ali asked quietly. Wayne smiled sadly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of complete conviction. "That you're exactly the kind of man I spent my career pretending to be. A real American hero." He released Ali's hand and turned to face the studio audience and the television cameras that were broadcasting this moment to 40 million Americans. "I was wrong," he said simply, but with such force that the words seemed to echo through the studio. "About this man, about what courage means, about a lot of things. And I'm not too proud to admit it." The episode aired 3 weeks later, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Newspapers across the country ran headlines about the confrontation and its unexpected conclusion. "Wayne apologizes to Ali" became one of the most talked about moments in television history. The footage was replayed endlessly on news programs. Editorial writers struggled to analyze what had happened and what it meant. Some praised Wayne for his courage in admitting error. Others criticized him for changing his position. But everyone agreed that something unprecedented had occurred. More importantly, the broadcast began changing hearts and minds across America. People who had hated Ali based on newspaper coverage and political rhetoric began to reconsider their positions. The image of John Wayne, their symbol of American values, apologizing to Ali and calling him a hero forced many to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. But the most significant change happened between the two men themselves. 3 months after the broadcast, John Wayne picked up his telephone and did something that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. He called Muhammad Ali and invited him to visit his home in Newport Beach. Ali accepted, and on a sunny afternoon in May 1971, the two men sat on Wayne's patio overlooking the Pacific Ocean, talking not as enemies or even as former enemies, but as two Americans trying to understand each other and their country. "You know what surprised me most about that night?" Wayne asked as they watched the waves roll in. "What's that?" Ali replied. "You never got angry. I said the worst things anyone has ever said to you on national television, and you never raised your voice, never attacked me back. You just spoke the truth." Ali smiled. "Anger is easy, Mr. Wayne. Truth is hard. And I learned a long time ago that you can't change someone's mind by making them defensive. You can only change it by making them think." Wayne nodded slowly. "You made me think. For the first time in years, you made me actually question what I believed and why I believed it." "And what did you decide?" Ali asked. Wayne was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the ocean. "I decided that I've been playing a character for so long that I forgot how to be a real person. I decided that courage isn't about never being afraid or never being wrong. It's about being willing to admit when you are wrong and to change." He turned to look at Ali directly. "You taught me that, Muhammad. In one evening, you taught me something I should have learned decades ago." The friendship that developed between John Wayne and Muhammad Ali remained largely private, known only to their closest friends and family. Wayne, whose health was already declining due to cancer, didn't have many years left to live, but those who knew both men said that the connection forged that night on television was genuine and lasting. When John Wayne died in June 1979, among his personal effects was a photograph of himself and Muhammad Ali, taken during that visit to Newport Beach. On the back, in Wayne's distinctive handwriting, were the words, "The bravest man I ever met, Duke." Years later, when interviewers asked Muhammad Ali about that night on the Merv Griffin Show, his response revealed the depth of his character and the wisdom that had made the transformation possible. "John Wayne wasn't my enemy," Ali would say. "He was just a man who believed what he was told to believe. And when he saw the truth, he had the courage to change his mind. That's rare. That's precious. That's what I respect most about him." The footage from that February evening in 1971 became required viewing in journalism schools, studied as an example of how confrontation could lead to understanding rather than destruction. It was used in conflict resolution courses as a masterclass in responding to hatred with dignity. It was shown in civil rights education programs to demonstrate the power of truth over prejudice. But the most important lesson had nothing to do with television or journalism or even civil rights. It was simpler and more profound. Muhammad Ali could have destroyed John Wayne that night. He had every reason and every opportunity to humiliate the man who had attacked him so brutally on national television. Instead, Ali chose compassion. He chose to see the fear and confusion behind Wayne's hatred. He chose to offer understanding instead of revenge, wisdom instead of retaliation, grace instead of justice. And in making that choice, he didn't just win an argument or score a moral victory. He changed a man's heart. He transformed an enemy into a friend. He proved that the greatest strength isn't the ability to destroy your opponents, but the wisdom to save them from themselves. That's the real power of dignity, courage, and grace under pressure. It doesn't just defend against attacks. It transforms the attackers. It doesn't just protect the innocent. It redeems the guilty. It doesn't just win battles. It ends wars. When Muhammad Ali died in 2016, among the thousands of tributes was one that stood out. It was from a film historian who had spent decades researching John Wayne's life and career. "In all my research," he wrote, "I found only one instance of John Wayne publicly admitting he was wrong about anything important. It was the night he met Muhammad Ali on television. And according to everyone who knew him, it changed Wayne for the rest of his life, making him more thoughtful, more humble, and more human." The world doesn't need more people who are always right. It needs more people who are gracious when others are wrong. It needs more people who can see the humanity behind the hatred, the fear behind the anger, the potential for redemption in everyone they meet. John Wayne tried to destroy Muhammad Ali on live television in front of 40 million people. Ali's response not only saved Wayne from his own hatred, but showed America what true strength really looks like. Because the greatest champions don't just defend themselves. They lift up everyone around them, even their enemies, especially their enemies. That's not just sports history or television history. That's what happens when the greatest meets his greatest test. Not with fists, but with grace. Not with revenge, but with redemption. Because that's what true champions do. They don't just fight for themselves. They fight for the best in everyone, even those who can't see it yet. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to change your mind, never too late to admit you were wrong, and never too late to become the person you always had the potential to be. Muhammad Ali showed us how to win in the ring, but more importantly, he showed us how to win in life, with dignity, with grace, and with an unshakable belief that every human being deserves a chance at redemption.